And I think it was just, his wisdom or his, brilliance. And he just said, well, it's Heart of Glass. We'll say Heart of Glass. And then we found out later that there was a film.
She wore tight leather pants and a see-through shirt on national TV when good girls didn't even show their knees. Men wanted her. Women wanted to be her. But behind that perfect blonde hair was a secret no one knew. At 79, Debbie Harry is finally showing her real face to the world. The woman who drove men wild in the 70s is now unrecognizable. From Playboy Bunny to punk icon to plastic surgery disaster, her transformation will break your heart. Debbie Harry's story didn't begin in a recording studio or under a spotlight. It began with a secret. She was born Angela Trimble in Miami, 1945, the child of an affair that nobody wanted to talk about. After just 3 months, her birth mother, a concert pianist, gave her up, and a conservative couple from New Jersey adopted her. They renamed her Deborah Ann Harry, never knowing the little girl they brought home would one day become one of punk rock's most unforgettable icons. Debbie always felt the split between where she came from and who she was expected to be. And when she later tried to reconnect with her birth mother, it went nowhere. Her biological father had already died. The door to her past closed quietly, but the impact stayed with her for life. She grew up in suburban New Jersey, where everything was proper and clean, but Debbie wasn't. Not in spirit. She was the kind of kid who snuck into the family's coal store just to smear soot on her clothes. She'd wander into the woods just to feel scared. She joined the Girl Scouts and sang in church choirs, but inside, she dreamed of tight black pants and bohemian life. By 14, she was bleaching her hair, trying to match the magic she saw in Marilyn Monroe, a woman she later found out was also abandoned as a child. Even when her classmates voted her best looking, Debbie didn't feel it. She hated mirrors. She didn't see someone pretty. She saw someone who didn't belong. That feeling only deepened with time. When she was 4, her adoptive parents gently told her she was adopted. They made it sound special, but the word stuck in her head like a warning. Different. That idea haunted her. She would later say she lived with a constant fear that people would leave. It played on repeat in her mind, being left behind, forgotten. Still, she also believed being adopted gave her an edge. It made her open to life, curious, restless. Her reflection might not have looked like her parents', but her spirit was always chasing something larger. What followed wasn't just growing pains, it was trauma. Debbie's first encounter with a flasher happened when she was just 8 years old. Then it happened again, and again. By her early teens, a man she believed was the jazz drummer Buddy Rich followed her home. It didn't stop there. In her 20s, a man broke into the apartment she shared with her boyfriend Chris Stein, tied him up, and raped Debbie at knife point. She didn't flinch while recalling it. She said the guitars he stole hurt more than the attack. Another boyfriend once held a gun to her head out of jealousy. That incident became the fuel behind Blondie's song, One Way or Another. Later, as her fame exploded, the stalkers came, obsessive fans, controlling exes, each one testing the limits of her safety and sanity. Before the fame, though, came the grind. After college, she moved to New York and worked a string of odd jobs: secretary at BBC Radio, a go-go dancer, a Playboy Bunny, and a waitress at Max's Kansas City, where the underground elite came to drink, fight, and perform. She served burgers to Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix. Sometimes she dropped them in their laps. Andy Warhol and his crew turned the place into a circus. It was in that chaos that Debbie found her scene. She started singing backup in a folk band. Then, in 1973, she met guitarist Chris Stein while in the Stilettos. That meeting changed everything. Together, Debbie and Chris broke away and formed their own band. At first, they called it Angel and the Snake. But after a few shows, they chose a simpler name, Blondie. It came from the way truck drivers shouted at her from the street. "Hey, Blondie!" The band found their voice inside the dirty, rat-infested walls of CBGB, New York's punk palace. Debbie strutted on stage in schoolgirl outfits with the energy of a street fighter. She didn't just perform, she prowled. Her voice was sweet and dangerous at the same time. The place smelled like dog vomit and rot, but Blondie kept going back. That stage became their launch pad. Debbie wasn't just a singer. She built a character. The Blondie persona was a paradox, like a blow-up doll with a razor blade tongue. She wasn't some girl crying over a man. She was the one kicking him out. In a world where women were supposed to be soft and submissive, Debbie gave them something fierce. Even her sexuality was hers alone. When the band's record label pushed a photo that showed off only her body, cutting out the rest of the group, Debbie raged. She wanted power, not objectification. Chris wasn't just her partner in the band. He was her photographer, her artistic match, her long-term boyfriend. Their bond was the heart of Blondie. Chris helped shape Debbie's image and sound. Even when illness struck and their relationship ended romantically, their creative connection never broke. Together, they built Blondie into more than a band. It was a movement. But with fame came confusion. Debbie Harry became so iconic that people forgot she was part of a band. They started calling her Blondie, as if she were the whole act. The band pushed back hard. They printed T-shirts and posters shouting, "Blondie is a group!" It didn't matter. The name stuck to Debbie like glue. Even she gave in eventually, saying she felt like Dirty Harry by the end, someone the world mistook, misunderstood, and maybe even misused. When Blondie dropped Heart of Glass in 1979, it didn't just top the charts, it shook the music world to its core. No one expected a punk band to go full-on disco, but that's exactly what they did. What started as a rough track called The Disco Song back in 1974 slowly evolved into a slick, electronic masterpiece. Debbie Harry's voice floated over a hypnotic beat created by a CR-78 drum machine and cutting-edge synths. Every guitar track was recorded separately for precision, and even though the BBC censored part of the lyrics, the song exploded anyway. Some punk fans saw it as betrayal. Blondie's own drummer didn't even want to play it live. But once it hit #1 in the US and UK, no one could ignore its power. It sold millions, went gold and platinum, and years later landed in the Grammy Hall of Fame. But Blondie didn't stop with one shot. They refused to be boxed in. One moment they were rocking out. The next they were covering disco, reggae, even early rap. In an era when bands stuck to one genre, Blondie broke the rules. Debbie Harry openly loved Eurodisco, and they stunned fans in 1978 by performing Donna Summer's I Feel Love live. It was one of the first times a rock band dared to play a disco hit. While critics screamed sellout, Blondie stayed unapologetic. They weren't chasing trends. They were dancing to whatever beat they liked. Their 4 US #1 hits spanned disco, rock, reggae, and rap, each one sounding totally different. And still, it worked. They weren't just playing with styles. They were changing what pop music could be. Then came Rapture. Released in early 1981, it wasn't just a hit, it made history. It was the first rap-inspired song to reach #1 in America. Debbie Harry's lyrics name-checked Fab Five Freddy and Grandmaster Flash, showing just how connected Blondie was to the hip-hop scene before it blew up. She never claimed to be a real rapper, but she gave rap its first shot at the mainstream. The music video was just as important. Graffiti, breakdancing, and even a young Basquiat appeared in it. That was the first rap video ever played on MTV. And for many future hip-hop legends, Rapture was the first rap song they ever heard. Debbie Harry didn't just bend genres. She reshaped fashion, too. Her look was as bold as her voice. Platinum blonde hair with dark roots, dramatic makeup, ripped prom dresses, fishnet sleeves. She didn't follow trends. She created them. She mixed punk attitude with movie star glam, and it worked. People couldn't stop looking. And unlike most stars, she didn't let record labels or stylists control her image. She dressed herself, made her own rules, and sent a message without saying a word. This is what power looks like. Her outfits weren't just wild, they were statements about femininity, rebellion, and control. Today, stars like Lady Gaga and Miley Cyrus echo her style, and Harry applauds them for it. She knows what it's like to take flack for being bold and sexy, and she's proud of the women doing it now. In 1983, Debbie Harry stepped away from her usual punk rock image and took on a daring role in the film Videodrome. She played Nikki Brand, a radiotherapist who seemed calm and professional on air, but hid a much darker side. Her character was drawn to danger, sex, and violence. In one scene, she talks to a caller with a cool, steady voice, but at the same time, she flirts with a man watching her through the glass. A tiny twitch in her eye gives away that something deeper is going on. She had brown hair instead of her signature blonde, and she slouched as if nothing mattered. Critics said she looked like a mix of 1960s factory girls and 1980s radio hosts. Debbie herself didn't think the role was very big, but the character became central to the movie's message about media and reality. Even her name, Nikki Brand, was a clever play on the idea of people becoming products, perfect for a film about how TV can change the way we see the world. 5 years later, she took another unexpected turn. This time, she played a racist villain named Velma Von Tussle in Hairspray. It was a wild shift from her Blondie image. Her character owned a theme park and tried to stop integration in the 1960s Baltimore. She also schemed to help her daughter win a beauty pageant. What made this even more surprising was that the film's director, John Waters, was known for making shocking X-rated films, but Hairspray was his first PG-rated movie. Debbie trusted him enough to go along with the new direction. Her role ended with a ridiculous scene where a bomb hidden in her giant wig exploded and landed on her daughter's head, leading to both of them getting arrested. Waters originally wanted her to sing in the movie too, but her record label said no. The film was also bittersweet. Divine, who played Tracy's mom and was a close friend of Waters, died just weeks after the film came out, making it his final movie. Debbie's part in it became a key moment in that strange, emotional chapter. One of the hardest decisions of her career came in the early 1980s, when she turned down the role of Pris in Blade Runner. The part eventually went to Daryl Hannah, who became iconic for it. Debbie was actually the first choice, but her record label didn't want her to take time off music. She later called it the biggest regret of her life. At the time, she was also taking care of Chris Stein and releasing her first solo album, Coo Coo. The timing just wasn't right, but it's easy to wonder, what if she had taken the role? When Debbie Harry released her first solo album, Coo Coo, in 1981, people weren't just talking about the music. The cover, designed by H.R. Giger, shocked everyone. It showed Debbie's face pierced with 4 huge metal needles, and some stores refused to even display the album. Giger had been inspired by a strange experience. He once went through acupuncture to ease pain, and those same needles became part of his dark vision. Each one stood for an element: fire, earth, air, and water. A 5th needle was supposed to represent the spirit, but the meaning didn't matter to many people. The image was so intense, it completely overshadowed the music, even though big names like Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards from Chic had produced it. Still, Cuckoo managed to chart in both the US and the UK, and even went gold in America. The first single, Backfired, had a creepy music video that matched the disturbing theme of the album. At the same time, Debbie was going through a personal transformation. Most people knew her as Debbie Harry, or simply Blondie. But that name wasn't even hers to begin with. She was born Angela Trimble in Miami, then adopted and renamed Deborah Ann Harry. After years of being defined by her band's image, she wanted to reclaim her real name. In 1981, she publicly stated that she preferred Deborah, not Debbie, and definitely not Blondie. By the end of the decade, she made it official. Her 3rd solo album in 1989 was credited to Deborah Harry, a sign that she was ready to step out from the shadow of her punk past and into something more honest. She once said that for years she had been Blondie to the world, but somewhere along the way, she became Dirty Harry. It was her way of saying she'd changed. She wasn't just the image anymore. She wanted people to see the real person behind the fame. That same solo album, Deaf, Dumb, and Blonde, told a very different story depending on which side of the Atlantic you were on. In the UK and Australia, the record did really well. The lead single, I Want That Man, shot up the charts and became a hit. But in America, it barely made a dent. The problem wasn't the music. It was the lack of support from the record label. Critics praised the album's production, especially since Debbie had teamed up again with Chris Stein and producer Mike Chapman, who had worked on Blondie's biggest hits. But without proper promotion in the US, it went mostly unnoticed. It was a frustrating reminder that even great music could be ignored if the business side failed to show up. Debbie Harry was always known for taking risks, and one of her boldest moves came in the mid-90s when she joined the Jazz Passengers, an avant-garde jazz group from New York. It started as a one-time gig, just a guest spot on a record, but quickly turned into a full-blown collaboration. For 4 years, she toured with the group and proved that she was more than just a punk singer. She had real vocal range and emotional depth. Critics were shocked at how well she handled jazz. One said she held notes with a strength that was unbelievable. Another said her stage presence made the songs come alive. Debbie herself joked that she was afraid they'd fire her after the first rehearsal. But her natural talent and theatrical flair made her a perfect fit. She wasn't just trying something new, she was reinventing herself. But long before all this, before fame and jazz tours, Debbie had a close call that could have ended her story before it ever began. One night in the early 70s, she was trying to get home in Manhattan. It was late, she was tired, and no taxis would stop. A small white car kept circling. Eventually, the driver, a clean-cut man with curly dark hair, offered her a ride. At first, she hesitated, but out of desperation, she got in. As soon as the door closed, she knew something was wrong. The inside of the car was stripped. No handles, no way out. She panicked. But there was a small gap in the window, just enough for her to stick her arm out. She reached the outside door handle and flung herself from the moving car. The driver sped up, maybe trying to stop her, but it actually helped throw her clear onto the street. she narrowly missed getting hit by a cab. Years later, when she saw news reports of Ted Bundy's arrest, she recognized him instantly as the man behind the wheel. Officials said he was in Florida at the time, but Debbie never doubted what she saw. That wasn't her only brush with danger. In the early 70s, she was in a terrifying relationship with a jealous ex-boyfriend. He eventually broke into her home, held a gun to her head, and threatened her life. That trauma stayed with her, but instead of hiding it, she turned it into art. She wrote One Way or Another from the point of view of a stalker. It was twisted and a little funny, but that was the point. It was her way of surviving something awful. Years later, she said writing the song helped her take control of a dark memory. It was more than just a hit song, it was therapy. But that wasn't her only stalker. Debbie has had more than a few over the years. Some were exes who couldn't let go. Others were strangers who became obsessed. One fan sent her so many letters that she had to get police and private investigators involved. They found out he was mentally ill and not being cared for properly. Debbie always talked about these experiences in a calm, almost detached way. But underneath it all was the truth. Being famous came with a cost. Her ex-boyfriend and bandmate Chris Stein saw it too. He lived through it with her. These constant invasions took a toll. In her memoir, Face It, Debbie wrote about how all of it, being adopted, being stalked, being famous, left her with a deep fear of abandonment that never really went away. Then there was the time she shared a strange backstage moment with David Bowie. In 1977, Blondie was still new, opening for Iggy Pop's tour. One night, Bowie and Pop couldn't find their usual drug dealer, and they were desperate. Debbie had a gram of cocaine someone had given her, so she offered to share. Once they had their fix, Bowie thanked her in the weirdest way, by dropping his pants and flashing her. Debbie wasn't shocked. In fact, she said she was flattered. It was just another day in the world of rock and roll. She admired Bowie deeply, calling him a genius. And in that bizarre moment, she felt like she was part of some strange club. One where nothing was too weird, and anything could happen. Debbie Harry might have been the face of Blondie, but behind the platinum hair and punk attitude was a woman carrying more pain than most fans ever imagined. Her story isn't just about fame. It's about trauma, survival, and a series of personal tragedies that would have crushed almost anyone else. In the mid-70s, when Debbie and her boyfriend, Chris Stein, were still struggling musicians in New York, something horrifying happened that she never forgot. After a late-night show, they were attacked at their own front door by a man with a knife. He forced them inside, tied up Chris, and then sexually assaulted Debbie. The man took their guitars, a camera, everything of value, and left her with something far worse. But what shocked people later was how Debbie talked about it. She said the stolen guitars hurt more than the assault. She didn't cry, didn't go to the police, didn't even try to process it. She just moved on. And while that might seem cold to some, it was how she survived. She chose not to be a victim, not because it didn't matter, but because she wouldn't let it define her. But the pain didn't stop there. Debbie had always struggled with the fear of being abandoned. She was adopted at just 3 months old, after being born from an affair and given away. That wound ran deep. As she got older, she hired a private investigator to find her birth mother. When she finally did, her mother, a concert pianist, refused to meet her. That second rejection hit just as hard as the first. It didn't matter that Debbie was now famous. All she wanted was some connection to her roots, but she never got it. Then came the drugs. As Blondie shot to stardom, Debbie and Chris started using heroin. At first, it seemed casual. Everyone around them was doing it, and they thought they had it under control. But by 1980, they were deep in addiction. Debbie later admitted that for a couple of years, she was a full-blown junkie. Their music was still charting, but behind the scenes, everything was falling apart. The band's manager quit. The record label dropped them, and the IRS showed up. They had no idea that their accountants hadn't paid taxes for 2 years. The government didn't care whose fault it was. They came in hard. Debbie and Chris lost their Manhattan townhouse, their belongings, and even Debbie's clothes. It wasn't just a financial loss, it was everything. And to make it worse, Chris was diagnosed with a rare and deadly skin disease that almost killed him. She spent months caring for him, watching him suffer while their lives crumbled around them. But somehow, she didn't break. When people ask how she got off heroin, she doesn't tell some dramatic story. She says it just became annoying. Buying the drugs took too much time. It wasn't fun anymore. So she stopped. No rehab, no therapy, just a decision. She and Chris did go to treatment later, together. But by then, the worst was over. Even after everything they went through, addiction, illness, financial ruin, their relationship couldn't survive. By 1987, they broke up. It wasn't about love, it was about exhaustion. They had been through too much. Yet, somehow, they stayed close. The respect never disappeared. In the late 1990s, Debbie Harry did something most people didn't expect. She brought Blondie back from the dead. After years of silence, she reunited with Chris Stein and Clem Burke, the core members of the original band. Nobody really knew what would come of it, but then Maria hit the airwaves. It wasn't just a comeback, it topped the UK charts, and suddenly, Blondie was everywhere again. Just like that, they proved they still had the magic, and Debbie wasn't done yet. More than 2 decades later, in her late 70s, Debbie didn't slow down. She walked straight into the high-fashion world. In 2024, Gucci featured her in their cruise show, not just as a legend, but as a model for their new Blondie handbag. At 79, she stood tall on the runway, surrounded by much younger faces. But somehow, she stole the show. It wasn't nostalgia, it was relevance. And while most stars her age fade into the background or quietly retire, Debbie Harry keeps pushing forward. She still performs, she still creates. She refuses to be dismissed because of her age or her looks. She's not just surviving, she's rewriting the rules. In an industry that often forgets women after 40, Debbie's making sure the world remembers her at 79.